This week we're talking about resolution, what it actually means, how it works in Photoshop, and why it matters when you're getting images ready for print or digital media. You've probably run into this before. You drop an image into Photoshop and it comes out tiny. You scale it up and now it just becomes a big blurry mess. Or possibly maybe it's the opposite. The image imports, but it's so massive that it takes up your whole screen at like 12,000% and you have to resize it. Or you go to print something and it looks completely different than it did on your monitor. All of those little headaches, all of that has to do with resolution. So let's start with the basics. As you might already know, digital images are made up of pixels, or tiny colored squares with one color per square. Digital images are made up of millions of these pixels. If you zoom in far enough on an image, you can literally see the grid at work. But when you zoom out, your eyes blend the colors together and make it feel like a complete image. If you've ever studied art history, you might be familiar with pointillism and the works of Georges Seurat. He didn't use blended brush strokes. Instead, he used tiny dots of color placed really carefully. And when you stand back, your brain merges them into a full scene, and it's kind of wild if you see it in person. They're very large paintings. But imagine instead of millions of dots, if Seurat used only 16 dots on the same size canvas. That would look ridiculous, and it'd be impossible to tell what is what. The detail is much clearer when we can use more dots, and we can pack them into a smaller space to create more detail. And this is exactly how it works with digital images too. More pixels mean more detail. Fewer pixels mean less detail. You've seen this in real life, even if you weren't thinking about it at the time. You might have played Minecraft. Those chunky blocks, those were put there on purpose. They're intentional, low-resolution gameplay. TV screens, when you're shopping for one, how do you know whether you want to buy a 1080p or a 4K? That's how many pixels the TV can possibly show. Or phone cameras, whether you get a 12 megapixel or a 48 megapixel literally determines the amount of pixels that can be taken at one point in time. Or on YouTube, when you're trying to stream videos at 720p or 1080p, this has to do with how many pixels are being sent to you at one time from YouTube servers. So when you're talking about resolution, you're not only talking about how many pixels that you're using, you're talking about the density, or how tightly packed those pixels are. It's pixel density that determines how big or sharp something looks when it's printed or it's shown on the screen. So when we talk about images, you're going to hear two terms throughout the semester. We're going to use them interchangeably, and that's DPI or PPI. PPI means pixels per inch. That's the language of digital screens, phones, laptops, and TVs. DPI means dots per inch, and that comes from printing. It's about how many tiny little ink dots a printer can lay down in 1 inch of space on a sheet of paper. You can't print pixels, right? You need to physically mark something on the paper like Seurat did. So printers simulate each pixel using lots of tiny little dots of ink, sometimes overlapping and sometimes spaced out to let some of the white paper show through. That's why we use PPI when designing and DPI when printing. So this is why you might see some programs refer to PPI and some refer to DPI. And basically it refers to how much detail we're squeezing into each inch of space. So screens use pixels, printers use dots, same goal, different tools. In resolution then, a higher number means that there's more pixels packed into an inch by 1 inch space. And the lower number means that there's less pixels packed into a 1 inch by 1 inch space, and therefore those pixels have to be stretched out. And that's when images start to look soft or jagged. Let's see how this works in Photoshop. If I go into Photoshop and create a new document that's 1 inch by 1 inch, and I set the resolution to 4 dpi, I only get 4 pixels across by 4 pixels down, and that's 16 pixels total to work with. That's it. That's all we have. If I drop a photo into this space and try to scale it and fit it and rasterize it, it's going to look terrible because the canvas just doesn't have enough pixel detail or data to represent the image clearly. But now if I make the same 1 inch canvas at 72 dpi, now I have 72 pixels by 72 pixels, and that's over 5,000 pixels total, which is a lot more room for detail. And if I bump it up once again to 300 dpi, now we're looking at 300 by 300 pixels, which is 90,000 little tiny squares packed into the exact same 1 inch by 1 inch space. Same size physically, way more information inside. So when we change the resolution, technically we're not making the image bigger, we're actually just making the pixels smaller and packing them more tightly together. And this concept is the foundation for everything we're going to do this week. We're going to work with existing images and prep them correctly for print and digital, like the web or email, which means adjusting the resolution, understanding when and when not to resample or resize an image, and making sure that your image will actually come out clear and clean where it needs to go before you do all that work designing with it.